Because in order to do something in your own country, you need to know what you had, what you went through, and what you can have. That is what looking back and moving forward. This is a particular decolonial expression. Now, I have borrowed a lot from Professor Mignolo in terms of phrases, like, for example, epistemic disobedience, epistemic violence. Professor Mignolo's Decoloniality and Decolonization of Knowledge critiques dominance of Western knowledge system and seeks to validate alternative, often marginalized knowledge tradition. It involves questioning the assumption that Western knowledge is universal and exploring the epistemologies, ontologies, and methodologies. It aims to recognize the impact of colonialism on how knowledge is produced, disseminated, and valued, and to create space for alternative perspectives and approaches. This is the reason we are doing this special lecture series with Professor Walter Mignolo, starting with this. We had one Philippine scholar, also Caroline Skov from Philippines last month. And this will continue for a year-long process. Walter Mignolo giving me all the names of the expert and with Alatas. I don't know whether Professor Alatas is here. Is he? Has he joined? No. Professor Alatas actually first gave me the introduction to Professor Mignolo, and I'm very grateful for that. He's not here. But when I wrote the first letter and I got back that he heard of Asiatic mode of production, etc. So it was really very enthralling, encouraging, and motivating to start this series. And this series wants to actually come out with a book clearly telling what should we decolonize, what is decolonial. So I won't go much into Professor Mignolo's work because it's a 30 years of work, if not more. Because when I read his Dark Side of Renaissance, it was 2000. It was published, if I remember, 1995. So from 2000 onwards, I have been following his research along with Quizano and Catherine Walsh and trying to figure out what decoloniality and decolonization of knowledge means. So after this long, we are starting this, and this is a new university in India, and it is not known too much, but I'm sure after this series of lectures, we might be making a print in the Indian also, an Indian psyche also in terms of the changing attitude towards reality. See, I'm sorry to say, with due apologies, that there are less Indians who work on this than there are more Indians working still on Talcott Parsons, following Parsons and following the European marks. Not the, I mean, this is almost a taboo in India that you cannot talk about Asiatic marks, who was actually Eurocentric and Orientalist. I didn't say this much. Many people before me said this. Probably I'm the one in India who could say it. Even Irfan Habib said it in one of the articles. Anyway, not to distract this, but I think that there is no one than Professor Walter Mignolo who is a living legend whom we can follow. I am sincerely grateful to you, Professor Walter Mignolo, for actually taking this trouble for us to give a lecture. Thank you very much, sir. I hand over the microphone to you. You may start.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, there is an echo. Why there is an echo?
I'll take care of it.
Let me disconnect and connect. Oh, now there is. tell you when to change slide, right?
Upload the slide. Upload your PowerPoint.
The people have the PowerPoint in their computer.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, Professor Pula said that Barbara said that at the beginning that India is a colonial country, and she talks about dependency, and of course dependency, the debate on dependency started in South America in the 60s. Dependency has changed, but still is at work today. Dependency between, let's say, big countries and small or medium countries. So, but the situation, the historical situation of India and of South America and the Caribbean is quite different for many reasons I will just mention two. For you in India, the point of reference is the Enlightenment. But for us, it's the Renaissance. In the Renaissance, because it's the Renaissance during the second period of the Renaissance, that we experienced the colonization and the conquest of something that was called America. America didn't exist before it was invented by the European. And that is an example of how coloniality of knowledge means. Once America was invented, so people took it as a reality, but not a reality for the indigenous people and for the African, the African population, the population of African descent after the slave trade. So I would, since our experience of colonization, the history of colonization is different from India, we insist that what do we mean by coloniality and colonization and decolonization is a question that has to be answered locally. There is no, the idea that there is a kind of universal answer for any question, and especially questions like this, is a very modern, Western modernity drive toward imposing universal concepts and universal way of being and universal way of seeing. So this is for us in the Renaissance. I will proceed in this talk in two channels. On the one hand, I will give you a very snapshot of the process of westernization, because in the colonization of America, what started was the process of westernization. What westernization means is the kind of expansion, the planetary expansion of European way of knowledge, way of living, way of thinking, government. So that is when we think colonization and coloniality in South America after sociologists and Mignolo, we start from there. We start from there until now. And we will talk later on about what happened to westernization now. So what you have here is that first slide are the basic moments. So to orient you a little bit about what you mean by the westernization and what are the specific events that are kind of like marker of a long process of 500 years plus. So between 1500 and 1750, as you can see, for the conquest and colonization, and the idea of America was invented. So America was not discovered, was invented, but what is today the subcontinent, South America, the Caribbean, and the North, was of course conquest and colonized. And colonized means that the local way of living, thinking, governance, economy had been displaced, and European way of governance, of economy, of education, were institutions that the university, for example, university was a European institution that was transposed to the New World, also called America. And after 1750, until today, the structure of the university was expanded to Africa and to the different parts of Asia that you would know better than I. So between 1600, more or less, something very important happened in the process of modernization. That was the creation of the British East Indian Company that you know very well, and the Dutch East Indian Company. So at that moment began, two things began to happen at that moment, is a couple of centuries. On the one hand, began a conflict between empires, the Spanish and Portuguese, and the British and the Dutch, and later on the French. So there is a kind of an imperial difference that was created there, because the Empire of the North began to see the Empire of the South as less civilized. And that is very clear in Immanuel Kant in the 18th century. The second thing that happened is that the British and the Dutch and then the French began to do exactly what the Spanish and Portuguese did in America, but they did it in Africa and Asia. So that by 1750, the entire planet was already being touched. Not necessarily all the corner of the planet, but an important region of the planet were already kind of intervened by European empire. So, say 1652, the Dutch and the British began to invade South Africa, but you know, 1757, the Battle of Plassey, kind of is a mark of the moment that Britain began to kind of be installed, inhabit India without being invited and without passport. So I'm here. By the 1850, of course, the British were already established in India, and they initiated the Opium War. So there is a very important third aspect of what happened in the 16th century. I mentioned the imperial difference between European conflicts, that eventually will lead to World War I and II. The colonization, and that is a kind of the colonial difference that began to be established with barbarians, quotation mark, in Africa and Asia that had to be civilized. And the third is the Opium War. And what happened in the Opium War is the third aspect of these changes of the process of westernization, which is coloniality without settler colonialism. That is very important. Because neither China, nor Russia, nor India, nor Iran, nor Turkey were colonized in the same way. In the same way that was India or Indonesia or South America and the Caribbean and Africa. So we began to understand that coloniality that takes the name from colonization is something different because it can work without settler colonialism. And that is what happened to China. And unfortunately, China is trying to kind of recover, let's put it that way, after 150 years or so of the invasion of Western colonialities. So I can read here. In the 1890s, a couple of meaningful events happened in the process of Westernization. And that is the United States entered the global order. So the Hispanic War, they kind of took the last possession of the Spaniards in Puerto Rico and Cuba and in the Philippines. But at the same decade of 1890, you may know very well what happened is Japan also entered the global order when they kind of reached China in the Sino-Japanese War, and in the Russian-Japanese War. So we have two new Asian here, US and Japan. They will collide in World War II. So you see that Westernization is a very complex process that we have to identify the key moment and trying to understand these changes. Otherwise, decolonize doesn't mean anything if we don't understand how the process of Westernization, Western colonization unfolded and what were the consequences of that process. So in 1917 we have the Russian Revolution, and that is a very another important moment. Why? Because Russia with China was never colonized. China was an empire, parallel empire to the Western Empire. And the Soviet Union continued under the different kind of political regime, continued the tradition of the Russian Empire. And what is important here, that many people already remarked that, is that the Russian Revolution is a Western Revolution. And that is a Western Revolution, and that is the Western kind of ideology that emerged in the Enlightenment, liberalism and socialism collided, but socialist communism and liberalism are two Western ideologies. But that is a little bit different with the rest of the world as we can see. So since World War I and World War II, is the story we know after 1945. The US, who entered in the global order as an actor in the global order in 1890, were still England and France were kind of the dominant empire, and the Dutch was the kind of following suit. After 1945, the US took the lead until today, and now we are in a very kind of tense moment because the US is kind of losing the leadership that conquered in 50 or 60 years since World War II. So this is a very schematic outline of the process of Westernization, which at the same time not only kind of was successful in imposing Western way of thinking, living, doing things in the rest of the world, at the same time created conflict. created responses. Well, now, I will move to the second slide. Sorry, I'm kind of cold. And I will give you now a brief introduction to key concepts. And I invite you to connect the concept with the historical summary that I just did. The concept of coloniality is the darker side of the Western modernity. And this concept that didn't exist until 1992. Until 1992, what we knew was just colonization and decolonization. But Quijano introduced coloniality. And that was a breakthrough because what coloniality showed is that modernity has a darker side that doesn't mention, which is coloniality. And justified, what happened? There was some kind of noise. And we don't see coloniality. It's like in Freud, you don't see the unconscious. But the psychoanalysts tell you how it works. What you perceive, and psychoanalysis is the narrative of the people being analyzed. But you don't see the unconscious. The unconscious is a conceptual structure that is created by Freud and then developed by Lacan to understand that beyond what is being said, there is something else that somehow control that saying. Well, we can say that coloniality is the unconscious of Western civilization. And this is different from colonization. So coloniality is the logic of colonial expansion, the Western colonial expansion, where colonization are a specific historical moment. Colonization, the Spanish colonization of America, the British colonization of South Asia, the Dutch colonization of Indonesia, the French colonization of North Africa, etc., etc. So coloniality is only valid to understand and explain Western modernity and Western civilization. It's not valid, let's say, to the Ottoman Sultanate or the or the Delhi Sultanate for us in India, or the Persian, or the Chinese, or the Inca, etc. So coloniality, we have to understand it as something that helps us to understand the darker side of modernity. So coloniality, and the second concept that Quijano understood was coloniality of power. Coloniality of power is the colonial will of Western imperial monarchies and nation states since 1500s. So probably you know the concept of will to power that Schopenhauer Nietzsche, and that is very important. What they forgot was the modifier, modern. So what we get in Schopenhauer and Nietzsche is a modern will to power. What they perceived was the will to power of the emerging bourgeoisie in Europe, but they failed to see the will that the same bourgeoisie have another aspect of the will to power that was the colonial will to power, that was a kind of expansion through the planet. And the third concept key to Quijano, introduced Quijano, was the colonial matrix of power. So the colonial matrix of power is, we'll need another talk just to explain the colonial matrix of power, but you can find it in many of our publications. It's a complex structure, let's say again, parallel, the same way that the psychoanalysts created a structure to kind of show what how the unconscious works. So we created, Quijano introduced it, and then we unfolded the concept of colonial mixture of power to understand how it works. And it works briefly in 4 different domains. One is knowledge and understanding. So the control of knowledge and understanding is managed by the colonial will to power. And then you can see, when you see how the kind of the Western science and Western education, Western institution of education have been expanded. Of course, didn't eliminate local form of education and form and institution, but destituted them in the sense that then became less important. They became valid for the local population, but what Europe was offering was a universal way of knowing. So knowledge and understanding is one of the domains. The other domain is governance. So the way of governance, the Spanish brought the viceroyalty to the Americas, the British brought their own way of governance and installed the Raj of India, etc., etc., etc. So that form of governance is, in this long period where the Westernization was the first period, 1500, 1750 was the monarchy, and then the monarchies were displaced by the nation state, and the nation state was the emerging bourgeoisie that were kind of made the French Revolution and the Glorious Revolution in India and took over. And that is a moment of emancipation, and that is what Kant articulated. But that bourgeoisie that emancipated in the 18th century is the same bourgeoisie that is kind of depriving of liberation to the rest of the planet. So the struggle for decolonization during the Cold War was the first strong moment in which the colonial subjects wanted to become decolonial subjects. So there you have one beginning of the answer. What does it mean to decolonize from our perspective? So to decolonize means to delink from our coloniality of being, that we have been kind of educated and schooled in coloniality, to become decolonial subject. So how we become decolonial subject? Well, knowledge is a very important moment, because decolonizing knowledge means to delink from the knowledge, the Western knowledge, and to create decolonial knowledge. So to create decolonial knowledge means investigation and means also pedagogy. So decolonial pedagogy cannot just be done with textbook. Decolonial pedagogy has to be linked to decolonial knowledge, and decolonial knowledge, decolonization of knowledge, and decolonization of knowledge have to kind of be connected and nourish decolonial pedagogy. So the third domain is the economy. Today, people confuse the coloniality of the economy with capitalism. Well, capitalism is one form of economy that became hegemonic, but there are other ways of economy. Economy comes from the Greek 2 words, oikos, which is the kind of the extended family, what we call today the communal organization, not just a small family of mother, father, and kids, but the oikos, like IU in Peru, and I'm sure you have something similar in India. Oikos was the Greek word to mean the extended family, the communal. But the communal to live needs some kind of regulation, that kind of articulation. So that articulation was the nomos, which is kind of law, order, organization. So oikonomos became economy. So economy means, in that sense, the administration of a scarcity, so the communal can live and can survive and can help each other, etc. But capitalism kind of displaced displaced but didn't kill those former economy. I mean, we have a lot of example of indigenous communities in South America, and I'm sure that you have also in Asia, that those oil economies coexist next to capitalism. So, so that is an important question of the decolonizing knowledge, because the question is to change, to the link from that idea that the economy has to be capitalism, and to create a different kind of economic knowledge, the colonial economic knowledge, that will help to create and to continue to maintain an economy that is the administration of the scarcity and not an economy of accumulation. Well, I have a lot more to say about how this kind of what we call capitalism today emerged in the 16th century, but that will be too long. But the point here is that we call capitalism today, for us, don't look at someplace else, don't look at before 1500. Of course, economy existed in every kind of civilization or culture, but capitalist economy is has been created in the process of the conquest of colonization of the New World, and from there on have different outlets, and the colonization and this type of economy created the condition for the Industrial Revolution, and we enter that moment in a new kind of world order. And then after 1945, the kind of the digital revolution brought us to what is today artificial intelligence, etc. So all of that are the basic concepts that Quijano introduced in the conversation. So decoloniality, he said, shall be epistemological reconstitution. And epistemological reconstitution is what I was telling you a few minutes ago, when I was telling you with example of knowledge of the governance of the economy, to the link to show how Western concepts are local concepts that serve their own interests. So we have to show that, and we have to create decolonial knowing and decolonial knowledge. And there is a fourth domain that that I had to introduce here, and it's more related to the task we, and when I say we, intellectual thinker, journalist, artist, all the people who work not in the government, who work not in the bank, who don't work in the military complex, but work a kind of intellectual work. I mean, we work, our thinking is our doing. It's not theory on one hand and the praxis the other. Theory and praxis are together. I mean, what we think is already what we do. And the question of decolonization of knowledge, you don't decolonize knowledge with guns. You don't decolonize knowledge with public policy. You don't decolonize knowledge with manifestations. You don't decolonize knowledge with a slogan. The decolonization of knowledge means to understand, to do research, how coloniality of knowledge works, so we can move from there to the link from there once we know how it works and move in a different direction to create, as I said before, decolonial knowledge and work in decolonial pedagogy. So the fourth domain where our activity is more impactful, together with the domain of knowledge, because our activities is less impactful in the domain of the governance and economy. We can analyze, we can criticize, but we are not actors that have the possibility of doing something in the governance or doing something in the economy. And even if we do, the structure of governance and the structure of economy is so already strong that there is no room for us to be an actor there and trying to say, hey, you know, you should decolonize capitalism. But when we can be active and are active, and this kind of meetings that Professor Abadra is organizing is part of that, is the domain of knowledge and understanding and the domain of, we can call the concept of humanity. Since the Renaissance, a concept of human was imposed, was established. And that concept of the human was created by white European and Christian males who were also heterosexual, or at least if they were not, they didn't say they were not heterosexual. So that was this concept of humanity is of a tremendous importance because it's the measuring stick to create racism, to create the concept of race. The concept of race doesn't exist before the Renaissance, and I can go for another 10 or 15 minutes, but I don't have time. The concept of race, which is a racist concept, is an invention of the Renaissance. And the concept of race was invented precisely to establish the colonial difference with inferior people and with inferior civilization. So the concept of humanity is also the measuring stick for sexism, because as Trump will say today, there is only two genders, male and female. Well, the concept of humanity is equal to the concept of man. And that concept of men establishes all the kind of the hierarchy or the structure hierarchy of the Western Christian family. And the third aspect of this concept of humanity is the separation from nature. So the human is pure culture, and nature is something different from us. So you see how this basic seed that were planted in the Renaissance are still today well and alive. Sexist, racist, and all what we call climate change. So once we understand that, we have some tools to kind of the link from the coloniality of knowledge and to work with other people who have been realizing what is the problem with sexism or racism or climate change. They are not necessarily decolonial. And I have to say here that decoloniality is not the kind of the universal key to solve all the problems. When we talk about injustice, for example, or oppression, well, we don't need decoloniality to do that. There's a lot of people who are talking about that without being decolonial. So the question is to understand also what is the place of the decolonial option among the coexisting option at that time. And that coexisting option could be option we can work with under an option, like a conservative option or neoliberalism, that we have to confront. So that is we talk about the decolonial option, because there is nothing else but option. We live among options, scientific, religious, disciplinary option, and also the option that is being built in the common sense. Well, that was the second point. Let's see, move to the third point and start. So as I said before, I giving you some basic concepts and inviting you to kind of connect connect this concept to one another, but also to connect to Westernization and de-Westernization. Okay, the third set of concepts is a concept of that there is only local history, cannot be global histories, because global history can be enunciated, but global history doesn't make itself. It has to be, it needs a locality from where local histories are constructed. So the local histories of Westernization is the history of global design. But when the global design was expanded, as I explained in the first part of this talk, was the creation of planetary borders. Cultural borders, political borders, economic borders, racial borders, sexual borders, linguistic, artistic borders, etc. Why? Because the rest of the planet have their own way of knowing, their own way of doing all these things without the need to have the Spanish, the British, the French, the Dutch to say, hey, what you are doing is primitive, or what you are doing has to be kind of improved, you have to be civilized because what you are doing is kind of primitive, etc. So that began to create the borders. So since the 16th century, and more so the 17th and 18th, the entire planet began to live and dwell in the border. That my thinking on this issue began to realize when I dwell in the border. The first kind of indication of that border was that I was a descendant of Italian immigrant in Argentina. But there were other people, there were indigenous people, the people of African descent, that were also in the border. They have different kind of local histories to deal, to confront, or to adapt to Western, to what Western civilization was telling them to do. So the borders are, until they were created, were transformed, but still today, we can see it. There are epistemic and ontological borders, meaning that from the perspective of the West, you are ontologically inferior, so that is the base of racism and sexism. Racism doesn't have anything to do with the color of your skin or your hair or your nose. Racism is to find superficial marker to make you believe that you are an inferior human being. An inferior human being in relation to the concept of humanity, that of the human men that we inherited from the Renaissance. So if you are ontologically inferior, you are epistemically deficient. So you have to learn our way of knowing and our own knowledge. So there you have another entrance of how to work in decolonizing knowledge and way of knowing, because Western epistemology insists on the method. You have to have a method, but method is what the kind of the prison house Method is to kind of to do the thing as Western epistemology tells you that things have to be done. So we are moving from epistemology to nociology, and that is another story. So nociology, that is also a Greek concept, is larger because gnosis incorporates, means at the same time doxa, which is the common knowledge in Plato, and episteme, which is kind of become epistemology, that is kind of the rational knowledge. So we are kind of reconstituting nociology to kind of do the link from to the link and to kind of to get out of this kind of a label that if we are not kind of in the Western way of thinking, we are epistemically deficient. That doesn't mean to reject epistemology. So the science, the rational way of understanding, the Western way of rational understanding is fine. But the problem is the aberration. It's fine as far as it remains as one way of knowing, one aspect of nociology. The aberration is when this kind of epistemological way of knowing intend to be universal and imposed all over the world. So borders are created by the fabrication of colonial and imperial difference. So that is another set of important concepts that needs more elaboration, but I just give you the basics. South America and the Caribbean have been affected by the colonial difference, like India, Indonesia, and the African continent. Why? Because all these places have been colonized by settler colonialism. So they were subjects of settler colonialism. But I said before, China, Russia, Japan, Turkey, Iran have been affected by the imperial difference. They were not affected by settler colonialism. Neither of these countries were subjected by settler colonialism, but did not escape coloniality, as I said before. And the colonial difference started in the 16th century. And it started in the 16th century when the Spanish Empire that was moving up kind of defeated the Ottoman Sultanate in a battle of Lepanto in 1560 or something like that. But since then, the imperial difference is at work, and so Russia, China, Turkey will never enter the European Union because it has been in that long history has been marked by the imperial difference. Japan is different, but I don't have time to kind of go into the different. But it's important here is to understand the imperial difference in contradistinction with the colonial difference, because that is important to understand the process of westernization of the world. Next, well, I am trying to, I have still 10 minutes. I will try to finish in 10 minutes and give you a kind of brief, 2 minutes of, 1 minute of break, because I am bombarding you with a lot of historical dates and concepts. So, what we after Quijano, the concept of decoloniality after Quijano, what we do is, as I said, is to understand how the coloniality and the colonial metric of power was formed, was transformed, who managed, who controlled. And what is happening today after 2000 is that the colonial matrix of power that was fabricated, managed, transformed by Western empire escaped their hands. So the monster escaped the lab.
And the most clear example is China. China took capitalism, but not neoliberalism. So thank you for letting me know what capitalism is, how it works. Now we do it in our own way. So here it's important to understand the distinction between decolonization and de-Westernization. Decolonization goes more in the sphere of the colonial difference. De-Westernization goes more in the sphere of imperial difference, although there are kind of mixed that is not that clear cut, but it's important to start from the beginning with a clear cut and then analyze the complexities. Both started, not both started, but both were kind of articulated in the Bandung Conference. Why? The Bandung Conference was a decolonial conference, right? But it's a decolonial conference led by the state. It was a state project. And of course, it at the time was relevant and coherent with what's going on, because all the process of decolonization in Africa and Asia, the goal was to kick the settlers, send the settler home, and to create our own nation state. And that was a victory, but that was also a misery. So it was a victory because the settler went home. It was a victory because they created a form of government that they were managed by their own indigenous or native. But it was a misery because it was a nation state. And the nation state was already too entangled with the colonial matrix of power, with political theory, Western political theory, and Western political economy that cannot justify and articulate capitalism. But not bad, but yeah. Okay, so a state project are the Western project. I hear something. I hear something strange noise. There are some noises there. Okay, I continue. Now, okay, the Bandung Conference invoked decolonization as a state project. And the state project today is more of de-Westernization than decolonization, because decolonization today, after Quijano decoloniality, cannot be a state project. Why? Because the state is too entangled with the colonial matrix of power. So the conflict, the tension that we see today between the United States, the European Union, Russia, and China is a conflict between states. So what the United States and the European Union are trying to do is to maintain the privilege of Westernization. I call that re-Westernization. Why re-Westernization? Because the process of Westernization was no really competition. But after 2000, after the kind of the China and Russia began to kind of reorganize themselves, the expansion of Westernization began to confront adversaries. I don't know, I won't say enemies, but adversaries that are kind of trying to liberate themselves from what the European Union or the United States want them to do. So that is the process of de-Westernization. That is the conflict we are living today. Why? Again, because the monster, the control of the colonial matrix of power escaped the control of the West. So de-Westernization is not questioning the colonial matrix of power, but questioning who controls it. And that, again, is what we are seeing today with the United States and Russia and China. And Ukraine is a key moment in this conflict of de-Westernization and re-Westernization. So, as I said before, the Westernization began to be noticed after 2000. So decolonization, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and after the closing of decolonization during the Cold War, the decolonization as epistemic reconstitution, is no longer attempting to create a state, a new nation state. It's not attempting to take power of existing states. So the Zapatistas in southern Mexico are one example. Their rebellion was, and they say, we are not interested in taking the state. You keep the state. That if we go that way, we are kind of our revolution will end. So the Zapatistas introduced a way of knowing, of being, and reorganizing themselves parallel and independent of the state, being even if the state has always tried to kind of control them, persecute them, etc. So then you have a kind of a way of decolonization that requires certain kind of condition, a certain kind of people to engage into that. It's basically, was basically the Zapatistas, a revolution of indigenous people with non-indigenous. So Subcomandante Marcos, now Subcomandante Galeano, is not indigenous, but he understood and he kind of put himself at the service of the indigenous needs to help them, and at the same time to help non-indigenous people to realize what decolonization became after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So what distinguishes what I said, what distinguishes decolonization and decoloniality I already did say, but let me introduce another key concept to understand decoloniality and de-Westernization. So when we talk about coloniality of power and colonial matrix of power, how do we understand power? So power is a mesh of relations of domination, exploitation, oppression, disavowal that create conflict. So decolonization and de-Westernization are two different aspects of the conflict created by the coloniality of power and the colonial matrix of power. Since we have three concepts here, I mean, three channels, let's put it that way: domination, exploitation, and conflict. We have modernity, coloniality, decoloniality. So they are all together. If modernity and coloniality at some time in history disappear, decoloniality is no longer necessary, because when modernity and coloniality disappear, we disappear also the conflict that modernity and coloniality create. And again, de-Westernization and decoloniality are two ways of responding to that conflict. De-Westernization is a state-led project, and decoloniality after Quijano became a project of the political society, as we are part of the political society in the public sphere. So that's the question of decoloniality of knowing and decoloniality of knowledge and the decolonial pedagogy is our contribution to the transformation of the feeling, of the emotion in the public sphere. Why? Because knowing and knowledge control subjectivity and subjective relation. So what we are witnessing today in the public sphere is the growing of hate and insult. And if you don't agree with me, well, you are my enemy, and I have to insult you. I have to kind of degrade you. I have to disavow, etc. So that is part of our struggle to kind of to work on the coloniality of knowing, understanding, knowledge, and decolonial pedagogy, to fight for other way of understanding, of living, in which the communal and helping each other and living together, enjoy and love, etc., is more important than to have more things, to have more money, to defeat the adversary, etc., etc. So to understand now the difference between decoloniality and decolonization, think about this. Modernity and modernization. What is modernity? Modernity is a design, it's a project. So modernization are the implementation of that project. So one thing was the modernization of India, the other thing was the modernization of Asia. And today, one thing is modernization as is understood by the European Union and United States. And the other thing is how it's being understood by China and the Westernization. So again, modernization is maintained, but no longer as a universal global design of the West. We do our own modernization, and I would say that India and Russia are also in that in that move of de-Westernization in different ways that will be too long to understand. So what is the difference between coloniality and colonization? Well, the same, no? Coloniality, colonial power, is a logic of domination, while colonization is a specific way of colonization in Asia, in Africa, in South America. And now we have coloniality. Coloniality. There is again, there is an echo. Please correct the coloniality is the logic common at all form of colonization in time and space. So we understand now decoloniality and decolonization. Decoloniality is an horizon. It's a project that we are building now. We are building now, but with the precedent. We have decolonization during the Cold War, and decolonization and during the Cold War have two aspects. One was, as I said before, pushing the shelter home and building our nation state. But also the Cold War, decolonization of the Cold War, led to us a tremendous wealth of thought. Fanon, for example, Fanon was not in the struggle to create a state. He was a Caribbean in Africa. Gandhi was a great thinker. I mean, when I read Hind Swaraj, I understand the process, the struggle of Gandhi to deal with the categories of British conceptual colonialism. I don't wanna talk about here Amdekar, because when I mention Gandhi, I said, well, what about Amdekar? But it's just one example of what the process of decolonization left with us. So, Gandhi and Descartes and Fanon and Vico and Cabral and Lumumba and Césaire, all those are the great thinkers. So we are not inventing the power. We are kind of building on that tradition, but under different conditions. The different condition is today there is no more, there is no, not that is more, there is no point in trying to create or take control of a state, because the state, the form of governance, nation state, is too much embedded in the colonial matrix of power. So the task is, again, to work on the public sphere, to kind of nourish the political society, as Partha Chatterjee introduced this concept. I am using it probably a little bit different, but I think it's Chatterjee saw the difference between the political society and the civil society. There is a tradition in Gramsci too. So, but I am using the concept of political society as that domain, this sphere of the civil society that is no longer civil and civilized, but a kind of a struggle to do something, to live and think differently. So, and I close here. I close here. So there are no certain colonial to liberate, certain colonial to liberate as it was in the 900, 2000. And there is no point in taking the state, as I have been saying. So under this condition, again, I submit that decolonization is the task of the political society. Well, there is an echo, it's really disturbing. Decolonizing way of knowing and existing knowledge means to build the colonial way of knowing and emerging decolonial knowledge. The goal is the formation of the decolonial subject, liberated from the coloniality of knowing and the knowledge and knowing and of being. Being instead of the sensorium, the subjectivity, and intersubjective relations. I submit that I have that what I have done during this hour was an exercise in building the colonial way of knowing and contributing to building the colonial knowledges. And I thank you for your patience, and I stop here, and I hope that I didn't confuse much.
Professor Mignolo, thank you very much. But you want to take a 5 minutes break, do take a break. Then we'll come back. There are certain questions. We'll come back to that. And our Vice Chancellor has also joined your talk. You can see Vice Chancellor, Sister Nivedita University, he has joined. So take a 5 minutes break as you asked for, and then we will start the Q&A. Can you hear me, Professor Mignolo?
Yeah.
Take a 5 minute break as you wanted. Then we can go back to Q&A.
No, I think I was listening, I was understanding better before when you were talking to the computer.
Oh, no. I'm talking to you. What I'm talking to you. Should we start the Q&A, question answer? Or you should want to take your voice 5 minutes rest?
I am available.
Okay, let me then go to the chat. I don't think that...
Let me ask you another thing. Is a way here to type the question?
I told you to write in the chat box, but...
Because I can hear you, but it's very difficult to understand.
Okay, but there are that important questions.
If I could kind of respond to what ways...
Okay, Laura Corrigan from Italy. She's from Southern Calabria.
Okay. Okay.
Laura, please take a very precise question and don't take too many time to describe the question. Go ahead, Laura.
Buenos dias, Walter. Good afternoon to everybody. And I'm very pleased about this seminar. I'm really grateful for Professor Bulabhadra from Calcutta. Please, Bula, can you close your mic while I'm talking with you? There is a feedback. Thanks. So I'm very grateful to Professor Bulabadra for having organized this decolonial seminar. I'm Laura Corradi, I'm the director of the Decolonial Feminist Queer Lab at University of Calabria in south of Italy. And your work has been very inspirational for all of us, and especially your capacity to have developed the ideas of Hannibal Quijano, of coloniality of power and the coloniality matrix of power, which I used very much also in terms of the patriarchal matrix of power. So even if patriarchy in some areas are reduced, still the patriarchal matrix of power is there. So, and the idea of the linking, it's so important for intellectual, especially for young one. Here, one of them, Lenin Montilla, is listening to this seminar. He is also one of the person who's responsible for the Decolonial Feminist Queer Lab, and we are holding decolonial seminars on all topics, from giving birth, the decoloniality of pregnancy, to the decoloniality of knowledge, epistemology, and so on. So my question to you, very briefly, has to do with local history, because very often we produce local histories with stories of resistance and change and decolonization, but then they become appropriated, and the narrative is in a way subsumed to the dominant narrative. And how can we do to avoid this? We're trying to basically produce a knowledge that is not colonial, but then the system, the colonial system, which is still colonial also here in the south of Italy, the colonial system reuses our knowledge with different goals. So this is my question. Also, I wanted to know if, beside the Zapatista experience, the indigenous decolonization made by the Zapatista, also with a great attention to gender, if you know also the Kurdish experience of the Kurdish, in southeast.
Dear Laura, I have to interrupt because of the time situation. You have asked all those questions, and Medina will be in August. Medina Telestova will be coming in August, decolonizing gender. So wait for that, and allow others to question on Professor Mignolo on decoloniality and recoloniality. Allow us to do that, because the question you asked, I know, but I will say Professor Mignolo's discretion, but other people are waiting to ask questions, because you have asked 3 or 4 questions. Sorry.
No, just two. Just two.
Just 2. Oh, okay. Then my understanding is different. But that's all right. But don't take too much of Mignolo's time, because here also in Kolkata, India, it's almost 8 p.m. Okay.
Do you finish, Laura?
I'm finished.
Okay, thank you for very important intervention. Number 1, patriarchal matrix of power. Yes, I think it's very important to mark that, insist, not just to take it for granted. The Kurdish genealogy, the science of woman, that is tremendously important. I'm sorry that I forgot to mention that, but I have been paying a lot of attention, because that genealogy is precisely, it's gnosiological. It's no longer epistemic. And it's kind of and it's grounded in the local history of Kurdish women. So that cannot be expanded. So that's so crucial also to kind of understand the kind of the linking, the Kurdish woman, the linking from the patriarchal matrix of power, and creating a different kind of knowledge. and way of knowing for a kind of different purposes. Now, the question of appropriation. Well, there is nothing we can do. I think we have to keep on fighting because now there is a lot of article. I didn't have time to kind of refer to that, but since you question, I will mention it. There is several articles that say, well, what de Benoist in France is saying, what Dugin in Russia is saying with Deepak. I have a story there with Said Deepak. Is saying it's the same that Quijano and Mignolo are saying. Well, I am writing now. I already wrote an article and writing a short book explaining that what is the difference between dewesternization and decoloniality? Because what de Benoist and Dugin and Deepak are doing, even invoking decolonization for us, is a dewesternizing project, not a decolonial project. Yeah? So there is nothing we can do to stop, because if we're trying to stop something, we became dictators. Say, no, you cannot do that. So that I will never take that move or trying to do so to stop somebody. What we have to do is to create a narrative that they are more powerful, that more kind of convincing for people, that the narrative that are appropriating our thought. And I mentioned one more thing, that is not new. We know that in the 70s, 80s, what is called la nouvelle droite in France, and since you are from the south of Italy, appropriated Gramsci. And they were talking about Gramsci's from the right, or something like that. So we have to kind of keep on pushing and creating more kind of convincing and persuasive narratives.
Professor Mignolo, would you like to see the chat box, the one or two questions, if you want to answer?
Yeah.
Yeah, please then look at the chat box. There are some questions, and there are others which we are thinking that you know everything, or they don't know, but you are supposed to know. So, should I give some preference to our Vice Chancellor? Because I just saw he has. Okay. Let me read the question to you then.
I see. I have seen the question here.
What
Kumari.
is Quijano's turning point? I think he's asking about Quijano's turning point, not yours. Did you get it?
Well, I have a question long here.
Quijano's turning point, yes.
Who is talking?
Otherwise, this is Bula. Otherwise, you can reference to Chandraboli's question, who said, if you could kindly respond, in what ways can language function as a decolonizing tool for preserving and revitalizing indigenous knowledge systems?
Oh, okay. I am reading something here. Well, but let me ask the question of language.
Okay. Language question is very important, I guess.
Yeah.
Chandraboli, yes. Just
So when so can I answer the question of language?
Sure. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. So that is very important question and very meaningful to the colonial matrix of power. The colonial matrix of power, or what we call the rhetoric of modernity, that kind of hides the coloniality of power in the name of civilization, progress, democracy, etc. All the control of knowledge in the colonial matrix of power uh, is grounded in 6 European modern or vernacular languages derived from Greek and Latin. So for the Renaissance was Italian because of the Renaissance, the Spanish and Portuguese because they initiated the expansion. And after the 18th century was English, German, and French. And now English kind of beat German and French. Now the question is, what does it mean English in India or Spanish in Argentina? So English is very different, of course, to Urdu, to Hindi. So you have in India the kind of richness of languages. So why Gandhi wrote Hind Swaraj in Gujarati, not in English, and then translated it? Then you have an example of the kind of the importance of languages. But at the same time, you have to go through the imperial languages. So in South America, the indigenous people are producing a tremendous amount of knowledge in their own languages, in Maya Quiché, in Aymara, in Quechua, but at the same time, they have to use the Spanish because if they just write and talk in Aymara, that remains for their own community. So that is what I call border dwelling and border thinking. That you have a good example. But there is another dimension, which is what does it mean for us? It's different for you that they have been colonized by the Britain. Spanish and Portuguese and Italian after the Enlightenment kind of lost prestige in the realm of science, and they remain like language of a culture. So in the case of myself and all the people in South America that are kind of non-indigenous and non-Africans, we have 2 problems here. One is that we have the privilege of speaking Spanish over the indigenous population that speak Aymara and Quechua and Tocolabal. At the same time that we have the privilege in the colonial metric of power, we are limited. We are limited because we don't have that potential. Even if we learn Aymara or Quechua, well, one thing is to learn the languages pedagogically, and the other is to live in languages. When you live in a language because you were born in a language, and there is many people who have born in 2 languages or 3 languages, but that's another story. So the question here, to think about languages, you have to think, on the one hand, the colonial difference. The colonial difference is the difference between English and Urdu and Hindi, for example, or the Spanish and Aymara. And the imperial difference is how the Spanish or Portuguese or Italian have to fight today with English and German and French that control the rational knowledge. And you can see this phenomenon in translation. What you translate generally from European language, German, French, English, or to the third world, you translate science. What translates from India, from Latin America, from Africa to the first world, you translate culture. So there you have the problem. Once you identify the problem, you have to think about how to deal with it. I have another question here by Gosi Congra. What are the implications of Indian knowledge? Okay, I read it. Again, we have what are the implications of Indian to solve the environmental problems and promote sustainable development?
Please mute yourself.
There is an echo.
Whenever our Vice
Okay.
Chancellor wants to
Tell me.
ask you a question. Professor Anupam Basu. Professor
So,
Anupam Basu. He wants to ask
No,
you
no,
a
I am
question.
not asking any question. I am
Achha.
requesting you to mute yourself so that the echo is not there. I am not asking any question. I request you to mute yourself.
can I answer that question that Gosikonda wrote in the message?
Yes, Walter.
Okay. So the first question is, what are the implications of Indian knowledge system to solve the environmental problem and promote sustainable development? Well, what we are learning in South America is that the indigenous people have been always working on sustainable development and sustainable living. Sustainable development is a contradiction because you cannot have development and be sustainable. I wrote an article titled Sustainable Economies, and sustainable economies is something else. So that kind of the oikos nomos. So in that sense, the question is to work with indigenous people because they have that knowledge. We have to learn from there. And we have to help using using also the imperial languages to make that knowledge and way of living expanded. So the second question is, do we get any insight from Indian Gurukul education system like Guru, Shishya, Parampara, teaching a student relationship values for pedagogy? That I don't know. I don't know, but I don't know that what is the Gurukul education system. You have to tell me how that works. But I can tell you something that may be related. You see, the Christian education, so the world we are living today is the Western Christian and then secularization and changing the reason, God for reason. In that education, the question is to evaluate and to punish. And that is all over in a different manifestation. What we learn from indigenous people, the education is not to punish. Education, you have to guide. You have to guide the new generation entering into this world. So probably Catherine Walsh will talk more about that because that's the colonial pedagogy is her specialty. But I can tell you from my experience that once I learned from indigenous people that education is to guide, changed completely the way I acted in the classroom with my undergraduate and with my graduate students. So the question became a dialogue, a conversation. I know things that you don't, you know things I don't. So we are here together. Let's work on that and let's kind of not transmitting information, but kind of creating the condition for dialogue of a given topic, of a given problem, of a given issue. And we are all kind of the same. I used to say to the students, in a basketball game or a soccer game, who play the game are the players, not the coach. I am the coach here. You are the player, so start playing, and then I kind of intervene and say, well, kind of guide you. So I don't know that system, but that is what I learned from indigenous way of educating that I apply to my way of thinking also, and my way. And that is helpful also in intersubjective relation. When you begin to understand if somebody doesn't have your opinion, It's not wrong. It's not your adversary. It's an equal or a different opinion. So the question is how you establish a conversation, and not the kind of things. And that is the problem we have today, because whoever doesn't think from like me is wrong, and we have to do something to eliminate it. So I don't know the system, but that is what what I can tell you that I learned from indigenous education. I have. I will kindly respond in what ways can language function as a decolonizing tool for preserving and revitalizing indigenous knowledge. Well, that's important too. I think it's very important, even if we are not indigenous, to work with indigenous people and indigenous concept to get to the link from the domination of Western vocabulary. Because everything we say related to the dominant languages of the colonial mixture of power, we are invaded by concepts that come from Greek and Latin. So I mentioned one example. I said oikos, and then I say ayu. And ayu is a structure in the Incas that is still active today. So the ayu is for the Incas, what the oikos is for the Greek. So then you go again into the kind of the local history and how the kind of indigenous way of thinking can help you to decolonize knowledge and create decolonial knowledge. And once again, this is kind of where border thinking becomes a necessity, because Western knowledge is territorial knowledge. I will put here in the chat one key book that responds to all these questions. Liam Simpson. Liam Simpson is from Canada.
This is Ula. I'm again sort of compelled to interfere that we are past 8 o'clock. So maybe 5 to 7 more minutes we can continue. Because here it's 8 past PM, I mean. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I cannot understand you very well.
I'm saying that it is past 8 PM in the evening, so we have to finish within 5 to 7 minutes.
5 to 7 minutes.
Yes.
Okay.
Because it's past 8 PM, which the university is open, because we are in the university. So university will close around 8 PM. So we requested for another 10-15 minutes. So I'm saying that, yeah. Because sure there will be a lot of questions, and we'll do it some other time also. Because there will be actually...
I have another question by Mahendra Pandey.
By whom?
Okay.
Pandey. If you want to answer. But he left, I think. Anupam Basu left.
But let me answer the question.
Okay, answer the question, please.
Yeah. Professor Mignolo defined colonialism as the Western logic of dominance. No, that is coloniality. That is very important. Coloniality is the logic of domination. Colonization is the different instances, moments, and places in which the logic is kind of activated. So colonization in Africa or South Africa is not the same in India, the same in South America. But the logic of the three way of colonization at different time and space, that is the logic of coloniality. So on this slide, I want to ask that how colonialism can be defined in the Indian context, where India was captured and controlled by the outsider like Muslim before the coming of European Renaissance power. That's a very important question. Not long ago, through the PAC, I became aware of the fact that in India, you have to deal with two forms of colonialism. But I will say that in the case of the Muslim, coloniality is not yet at work, because coloniality is the logic of Western capitalist expansion and the economy of and the structure of the world order at the moment of the Muslim invasion of India is a different kind of a structure. It's the world order before 1500. That is one aspect of the question. So the second aspect of the question, and I think it's very difficult also, is that yes, you are right. You have to deal with two kind of colonialism. I know that the pact put both as kind of aspect of coloniality. I won't do that, but I understand that the pact is trying to deal precisely with that double colonial legacy. Now, the third aspect of the question there is when this kind of exploration may lead to kind of fundamental nationalism. And I understand that way and the way that the PAC is going as a de-Westernization. I understand and justify what he's doing, but at the same time, I don't see that as decolonial. And at the same time, I have to recognize that the PAC has done a tremendous work to understand our way of thinking. And there are one or two chapters in the first book of the series that are devoted to understanding the concept of coloniality and decoloniality. So the difference here is that I will not apply coloniality to both. I think that the British were already integrated into the colonial matrix of power that they contributed to expand and control. The Muslim invasion was in the world order that we call polycentric. Before 1500, there were many centers. And well, the Muslim was one of the centers, China was one of the other centers. But when the British get to India, the war is becoming monocentric. I think that distinction, I finish with that. That distinction is very important. And at the same time, I acknowledge and recognize that you in India have to deal with these two kinds of colonialism. I hope that
Professor Mignolo, I have to interfere because it's 10 past 8. I understand your interesting lecture has captivated everyone, but we had to finish. And for Professor Pandey, you should know that Muslims came in India in 8th century AD, lived with us, and it is only Khans and Mughals who colonized us, but not in the sense of the British colony, but settlers colony. Mughals and Khans were settlers colony. They were part of India. Do not say that they are not part of India. So I would say that rereading Indian history would be a good idea for all of us Indians who haven't done that in terms of decolonizing or decoloniality or recoloniality. I can only allow one more question because university staff is waiting to close. So is there one more small question? Okay, Professor Mignolo, Walter, you have thanked everywhere for this one. So I'll send you all the thank yous. But in the meantime, we have to close down. So I would say what you advise Indians to do in terms of now. how do we behave? Should we follow the colonial syllabus? And may I respectfully disagree with you that Gandhi is not the nationalist for us. Gandhi was in cahoot with the British colonial empire, who received the St. George Medal for best contribution to Indian British colonialism. It was Rabindranath Tagore, it was Subhash Chandra Bose, and I can make a host of names, but I don't want to, but not Gandhi. Gandhi is not non-violent. He is only non-violent in speaking, but his actions, if you read properly, all those people who are thinking Gandhi is non-violent should read the violence of Gandhi. I'll stop there because then it's going to be one-sided situation. I don't want that. But advise us that how should we deal with the indigenous literature? Because India, there is a tremendous illiteracy regarding indigenous literature. We have 26 languages. So 2 minutes answer if you can give. Otherwise, we all are very grateful and thank you profusely that you have given us this much of time at this stage. So your last word, sir.
Well, there is too much
Any
there.
last word for us? Yeah, okay. Any last word for us? Because there are a lot of people waiting to talk to you, but I cannot. They should talk to you. By all means, I will send the email and you can talk to Professor Walter Mignolo. But I can't because the university has to close.
Well, there is another.
Should we say good afternoon and good night? Laura,
Well, what shall I do? Again, again, there is an echo.
Again, it's an echo. Okay, I'll mute my.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I mean, there are so many things there, but I would say yes. In India, we have many indigenous languages in South America, but in each specific state or nation, the amount of indigenous languages is much less, about 2 or 3 indigenous languages. But I would say, I mean, I don't know how to deal with that in the case of India. But what I would say is that if you have another issue here to deal with, on the one hand, you have the double imperial legacy, and on the other hand, you have the tremendous amount of indigenous languages. And at the same time, I think it's important to keep in mind what are people speaking that indigenous languages doing. Because if we are not indigenous, we have to work with them if they want to work with us. So that is another question. So what I would say about indigenous languages is creating the condition to work together. I am working with indigenous Aymaras. I have been working for a long time in Bolivia and Ecuador. So and they are doing their own things. They are very aware of the things we are talking about here. They know what the colonization of languages mean. They know how to use Quechua or Aymara, and they also speak Spanish. And we are very limited because we speak Spanish, but we don't, in general, we don't speak Aymara or Quechua or Tojolabal, etc. No? So the question here with indigenous languages is to work with indigenous people who want to work with us, because they may not want to work with us, or they may like to work with somebody else. Let's say some business people instead of Decolonial. So the question is that we cannot solve because we invoke decoloniality. The question is how each of us conceive and practice decoloniality in our own very local and geopolitical history. That is fundamental. It's fundamental to understand our possibility, but also our limitation. So in South America, the Afro-descendant and the indigenous people are doing their own way of decolonizing. They don't need us. We need them more and us, and we are the kind of decolonial perspective that we are introducing is a decolonial perspective from people of European descent, not of indigenous and Afro. And people of Afro and indigenous suffer the consequence of colonization much more than us, and still suffering much more than us. So the question is, know you're limited and not try to kind of solve all the problem, because there are other people that are trying to solve their own problem. And the question is working together. So,
No, can
one more
we finish on that note and keep it burning, the fire that we need to understand more and more, and we can finish for now, and somewhere when we will be ready to give us second lecture sometime late, we can also pick up these ones. Can we say good night for now? For you, good afternoon. No, good afternoon now. I would presume that it is now about 11 o'clock or so. 11 a.m. I mean.
wow.
In United States of America, it's 11 a.m. in your eastern point.
Oh, but because you are looking up there, I don't know if you're talking to me or talking to somebody else.
Okay,
It's-
I'm looking up to you actually, but the face is posed by it's a computer thing and the seating arrangements. So can we say good night now and keep it burning, the rest of the questions, queries, etc. And we will invite you again to get a part of your, small significant part of your knowledge on this. Am I clear to you?
not quiet.
Not at all. Okay. Hey. Okay. We are finishing.
That's better. If you mouth point to the microphone, it's
Not
better
loud or.
to the screen.
Bula, close
I am saying
the
that we are
microphone.
finishing and we are disconnecting. So obviously, we have to go because it's quite a bit of night in India and university has to be closed.
Yeah.
So I say goodbye to you and we disconnect.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye bye.